morning. My name is Ron Robinson. I'm one of the founders of the Lewis Latimer Society of Chelsea. It's my brother Leo Robinson, the other co-founder of the society. We started the society in 1998, and we wanted to know where do African Americans fit in Chelsea's history. So we immediately found Lewis Latimer, the inventor and scientist. And through this book, if you opened it up, and they give a description of him, they talk about him coming from Chelsea, Mass. As a boy, he grew up here. There was a particular family in Chelsea that believed that they were related to him. That's where this book came from. She let me borrow it, opened the book, wondering why we never heard of this guy in the city. So that's how it all started. This program today is called Discovering the Roots of Black History in Chelsea, because those roots grow deep, very deep. So today we're going to talk about the Lewis Latimer House Museum in New York City and the role that his granddaughter, Dr. Winifred Latimer Norman, who was our historian and provided us with a lot of information and artifacts and things like that. So I'll put it over to Leo, say a few words.
Actually, we did a lot of research to find Dr. Winifred Latimer, who was actually living in Manhattan, in New York, on 8th Avenue. We made arrangements to set up a meeting with her to be able to go to New York and talk about being able to use her grandfather as a role model to young kids in our community and throughout the country. And she was very instrumental in working to save the Latimer House, which is actually the museum now here in New York. And we've been to we have a relationship through her and the museum. We've been there several times, just as she's been to Chelsea several times with us. So Ron will give a little bit more detail about the museum.
When we started, the reason why I wanted to do this show about the museum, number one, is because different residents have said to me, do you know that there's a museum in New York? And I go, yes, I do. I've been there many times, been there as it was developing. And in the future, you're going to see some pictures of his house was actually moved from one area to another area in Queens. Mm-hmm. And where it's located now is that area has Latimer Gardens, a big New York apartment building, huge building. And then there's a street named after him, Latimer Place, which abuts Latimer Gardens. So we were fortunate enough to be there for openings, pre-openings, a day in the life of the Latimer family. There were particular programs that were designed. We became part of the network because when we originally went there to ask Dr. Winifred, how can we use your grandfather as a role model for young people? We were concerned here in Chelsea about our young people being left out of the mix because we just come out of receivership.
And we never really talk about Chelsea's history, or we seem to leave out what contributions that African Americans have made, in not only in Chelsea, but throughout the country and throughout the world. And as you can see with Lewis Latimer and what his contributions have been to society.
Right. So when we went first to visit the doctor in New York, we had said that to her and that sort of thing. And we met other people, other doctors that were into this whole Lewis Latimer thing. People want to know about this man, even today, all these years later. You had recently had an exhibit. It wasn't us, in the gallery on Broadway. I don't know who did that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
They never contacted us and said anything about it.
No.
So there is a house on Charlotte Place that has a plaque about this is the site where Lewis Latimer was born. Hopefully in the future there'll be other things named in this city. A lot of times people, the way things are here today, people don't realize that the most basic thing about Chelsea is Chelsea's history, period. It's rich, rich history. So we're not necessarily, we're one of the people that push that about history. It's history.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to our first encounter and going to meet Dr. Winifred Latimer, is that we decided to take the train because Lewis Latimer improved the water closet on the train, which actually is the toilet. We thought it would be appropriate to take the train down, and we had a meeting with Dr. Latimer at her house. And I always think about when we were getting into New York around 7 o'clock at night, and we said to Dr. Winifred, we will come and see you the next day. And she goes, hold on, let me look at my calendar. She goes, I'm going to be at a meeting until 8 o'clock. Why don't you boys come by at 9 o'clock? And we sat with Dr. Winifred from 9 o'clock to after midnight, and she would pull out all these artifacts on her grandfather and have conversation, with us about her grandfather. And we felt it was appropriate to be able to share those things that we learned from her, as well as her learning about his growing up here in Chelsea and spending time in this area.
Yes. When we met her, she was near 90.
Yeah, she was in her 80s.
Yeah, 87 maybe, 88. And she passed away in 2014. They called us up, we attended the memorial service. And also met other family members that we really hadn't met that were connected to the Latimer family, whether they were his brother's kids maybe, one of his brother's kids, because two brothers, I believe, moved to Connecticut.
Yes, down in the Bridgeport area. And actually, we were recognized by the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, for our work with young people, and we accepted the award on behalf of Dr. Winifred Latimer, who was our guru when it came to working with her and getting the information out about her grandfather. And she would say to people, any information that you need to contact the Robinson brothers in Chelsea, because they know more about my grandfather than most people do, and they have the whole piece of Chelsea, which seems to be left out when people talk about Lewis Latimer, because they look at New York and not include Chelsea. And we want to make sure that, Chelsea is part of the whole conversation around that.
Well, and it's important because obviously this is the place of his birth, but the Latimer family in general is fascinating family because their activities touched on various parts of American history. And that's the bottom line with Lewis Latimer. He's African American, but he was part of America's history. And Whether it's through his father, who was an escaped slave, and the abolitionist movement. A lot of people don't even know about that, and how that relates to what's the sort of things that are going on today for different people, especially people of color. Of course, Dr. Winifred. So their family touches these different parts of, for instance, the father was an escaped slave. He was detained by the Boston police, George Latimer, when he was spotted on the Boston Common by slave spotters. Boston police ended up detaining him in jail, and abolitionists bought his freedom for $400, that sort of thing. And at the same time, his wife was placed in Chelsea, and that was as part of the Underground Railroad. So different parts of American history, this one family touched. George Latimer, also the Massachusetts Personal Liberties Law was developed because of him. That said you can't, if you're an escaped slave, you cannot be caught and sent back to your master down south or wherever you escaped from, that sort of thing. So it's a fascinating story. Reason we're talking so much about Dr. Winifred, and we mentioned the museum, because to us, she was the museum. She was part of a group to save Latimer's house in New York they sold the house, his daughter, then the house sat empty, then the city of New York was going to tear it down, and Dr. Winifred and others set up a committee to save the house, and they did, obviously. Once the house was saved, and they went on to raise money for by working with the Queensboro president. Queens, if you know New York, is a very historical place. To start developing the house, rebuilding it and all that, and moving it. And in the future, you'll see pictures of them actually moving the house, that sort of thing. So that's why we keep talking about her, because she was co-chair of that committee, and then she became the vice president of a new committee that was developed once the house was saved, called the Latimer Fund, where they raise money and work with the officials in order to make the house a museum.
Yeah, and actually when they were moving the house through the city, they let all the school kids line up to actually see them moving the house through the city, and it kind of brought back memories of when they were building a bridge and how they were moving houses here in Chelsea to different parts of the city to do that. And Winifred was very active with Claire Schumann, who was the president of the borough, who actually came to the dedication of the Latimer House when it got settled, and we were there several times for different openings. And the day that Claire Schumann showed up at there, she said, "I'm not going to introduce everybody who's here, but I want to introduce the Robinson brothers who traveled here from Chelsea to be part of today's activities here at the Latimer House."
Yeah, we took a picture with her.
Yes.
We lost the picture,
Yeah.
but we did take a picture with her. It was so fascinating about that day, because when we would go to New York, we would stay in Manhattan, and it takes about an hour to get to Queens, where the House Museum is. And we get there, and we got there late because we didn't realize the time. It took so long to get there. And thousands of people, I would say probably 10,000 people, I would guess.
That's a good number. Yeah.
And we were way up in the back, so when she said that, we were like, wow. We wasn't expecting that, for her to say something like that. But she goes, these guys came a long way. They're from the place of Lewis Latimer's birth. And we just felt proud, proud to hear that. Then that opened up doors to start. We knew a number of people there already. Even more people would come and talk, what's it like in Chelsea and where he was born and that sort of thing. So that's why this is going to be one of a series of 7 presentations, discovering the roots of Black history. Some will be done in the studio. Others will be on site at other locations. So we're pleased to be here today and to introduce and talk about our efforts regarding Lewis Latimer.
Yes, and I think it's important to touch upon the fact that Lewis's work with some of the greatest minds in the business. He worked with Edison, he worked with Maximum, he worked with Alexander Graham Bell, and without Latimer, Alexander Graham Bell would have not got the patent for the telephone. And he worked with Edison, and he wrote the first book on incandescent lighting. And I like to say, if he actually wrote the book, whose system really was it? And he worked with Maximum down in Connecticut, and eventually moved on over to work with Edison. And he was responsible for setting up the street lights in New York and Philadelphia, Montreal, and in England. So you could see the contributions that Lewis made to the world. I don't want to say just to Chelsea, it's to the world, because without those things, we would have lacked in communication and know-how to be able to communicate other than one-on-one conversations with people.
Well, it was fascinating. We ended up going to do research in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And what was so fascinating about it, when we got there, we were at their library, but we also went to the site where he lived. And on that site was a big power plant. So it was ironic to see this because this is where he lived. While he was there, he was part of the Bridgeport Scientific Society. That was with Sir Hiram Maxim. The Maxims are famous for not only electricity, but they also the machine guns. They were the inventors of that, their family, that sort of thing. Then eventually we were contacted by the Juneteenth Committee in Bridgeport, and they were looking for somebody that was still alive, that was part of the Latimer family, descendants. Because in their Juneteenth celebration, they would bring back all these various people that were descendants of somebody famous in history, that sort of thing. So we met quite a few people. The only descendant that we know of now is Price. What's his name? Mr. Price is former Urban League president.
Yes.
So we met him a few times, and so in Bridgeport we were able to say to the people about Hugh Price. He's the only descendant we really know. Dr. Winifred just passed in 214, blah, 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 that sort of thing.
Right, and they presented us with an award for our work with Dr. Winifred and our work with the kids, and getting his name out and keeping his name alive out in the world. They felt it was important to recognize us, and we accepted the award in honor of Dr. Winifred, who was no longer with us.
So the whole Latimer story is about youth, young people, education. Okay, so when we originally started out, we had already been working with young folks down in the Williams School. It was the Police Athletic League, and it was the Latimer Society. So we were able to work with hundreds of kids between the both of us. So, and we also I'm a Chelsea High basketball coach. You're a Pope John basketball coach. And then at one time, you get the realization that our kids needed more about education than sports. You could play sports, but education needed to be the thing pushed, because what would be the sense of just working with young people with sports and then they can't pass in school? So we took that angle of, with Latimer, science, tech, and we did that for many, many years. So we actually got a number of young folks looking at the direction of engineering or something in STEM, nursing profession, engineers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think, and part of that goes back to our connection with the Museum of Science, and I always think about Maria, who used to come out and present programs, and also when George Greenwich, who came out, who worked at the zoo and did presentations for us, and we were kind of surprised, African-American zoologist, and his saying would be, if you can't see them, you can't be them. So that's why the role of education is very important to our young kids in our communities. Like we say to kids, A's and B's mean scholarships, C's and D's mean you have to pay. So therefore, you need to be doing both. You need to be opening up your books, and if you want to be an athlete, that can help you get to the next level if that's what you're really trying to do.
And mentors.
Yes.
Mentors was also a big part of programming towards the kids. Maybe not, sometimes it's very difficult to get individual mentors, but group mentoring, like with two various engineering groups, male and female, especially female. Okay, because that was part of why we wanted to work with kids, because the young girls were having babies like mad. It had no future.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole aspect of mentoring was that we ran a golf program, and how it came about is that at Franklin Park, every summer the city of Boston would bring thousands of kids out to learn how to play golf, and we called up to ask, well, could we bring some Chelsea kids up there? And because we stayed every day with the kids, we didn't drop them off and leave them. We got to know the people running the programs and the Mass Golf Association. So we've been looking for a pilot program all these years, and it seems to be, you guys have something going on, let's get together. And we were able to set up a program and utilize engineers from General Electric who came once a week to work with the kids. And people go, do you golf? No, I don't golf. But the kids are learning about etiquette. They're learning science, like about distance, the wind. So those aspects, and they were mentors to the kids here in Chelsea. And one of the things that they used to do was they would take a kid and put him in front of a camera and say, if you ever, going to become something in the sport or in education, you're going to have to speak in front of people. So I want you to speak into the camera, say your name, your address, what your likes are, and what your dislikes are. And that helped so many of our kids. And our first group of kids, of 12 kids, all went on to college and all went in. Some went into teaching, some went into the business field, and some got into athletics.
And police.
Police, yes.
And college sports, coaching and things like that. The pattern was one of trying to show the local kids the world, what's out in the world, that sort of thing. And you connect it to others, other people, other organizations, and that sort of thing. One of my dreams still remain is to take a bus full of kids from Chelsea down to New York to the museum. We had that conversation some years back. I know Ray Monkowitz from CAMS was, if you ever do that, we'll support it 100%, that sort of thing. So that still remains a dream for me, to be able to take a busload of kids, local young people, even if it's for the day, you drive down or whatever, that sort of thing. So we'll continue to look at that.
Well, and I think, I don't know if you can get a picture of the shirt that Ronald is wearing. Actually, on February 3rd and 4th, we were participants in the Museum of Science Black History Weekend. And 2 days were voted to bringing in engineers and scientists and having the kids be able to meet different people. And we were there to meet the people re-engage with the people from the New York Museum who wanted to make sure that we were at the ribbon cutting. The president of the Museum of Science and had us come out, and it was just an exceptional day. And actually, Senator D'Amico was there, Danny Ryan was there, a representative from the senator from East Boston, her name escapes me right now. Her representative was there, and the artist from New York and the person from the Beacon Foundation was also there. And we're in the process of working out the details to bring the exhibit here to the city of Chelsea. And we'll go ironing out those details sometime next week, and it'll come to.
The exhibit is a public arts exhibit. Okay, and in talking with the artist that developed it, it was, as a creative person, how she would look at Louis Latimer and his life. And I expected to see all these pictures, and it really wasn't that. It was more, when you looked at it, it was about the filament, but it told a story just looking at it, if you really get into it, that sort of thing. So I'm very excited about the opportunity when that comes. Hopefully it'll be here before February's out. As you said, it was a great opportunity to meet the personnel from the museum, the director.
Yeah,
we met
Richard.
some of the kids that have participated. They came along with the exhibit. So we're looking forward to getting that in Chelsea, and that would end up being probably on the Broadway side where the monuments are.
Yes.
That will be placed. It's huge. Yeah. It's pretty good size.
12 feet high, 6 feet wide.
Right.
So,
It's a fascinating piece of art.
yeah.
And so that put us back in touch with the museum. They actually wanted to come to Chelsea, and I had to explain to them we're no longer in the library. I can take you, on walking tours or whatever, that sort of thing. But they were only here for the weekend. They
Yes.
weren't, so they couldn't do anything
Yeah.
like that. But they wanted to come here,
Yeah. But,
and eventually we'll get them here.
yeah.
Eventually.
Our hope would be to be able to bring them back when they come here. And I know the museum science people will be here, but we'd like to get the artists to come back.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Be part of the program. Yeah.
Creative. So that's where we're at in the future. We'll continue this series and introduce others that are part of Black history here. Folks that you never heard of or didn't know, or places you didn't realize there was history there. So we're looking forward to it.
Yes. So, in bringing this to a close, you want to end with some comments, or?
Well, I'd like to thank Ricky and Paula, Chelsea Cable, because they're partners with this series. We had discussions, so we want to be able to do a whole series of things, and hopefully, we'll try to maybe bring in some guests. Like, I'd like to bring in somebody from the public schools eventually,
Yes.
to see how American history is right here in the city of Chelsea. Because I always look at Chelsea as the overflow from Boston when people came here, whether that was through Reconstruction, escaped slaves, other parts of history, through either the wars, World War I, World War II, you know what I mean? Sometimes just your monuments alone, if you know people's names and know their history, you have people that were shot down in World War II that's on the World War II monument, their names and their families. Some are still here, some are gone, because you're longtime families.
Yes.
So the history is just fascinating about this town.
Yes, because our history is your history, so we need to make sure we incorporate all history in our
Right.
history.
Right.
And we'll leave you on that note.